Chapter 1, Human Biology, Science, and Society, Screencast 1. Now, one of the things that we'll always start off with all of the chapters are what are the key concepts that this chapter is trying to get across. So what I've done here is I summarized them on this first slide. So the first key concept is the understanding that living things have certain characteristics that give them that characteristic of life. This is going to be really important. So we'll spend some time kind of focusing on what those are. Another key concept is if we look at our surroundings, humans, we make up a small percentage of living things and life forms on this planet. That's really important also. The remaining are kind of focusing on science. So we'll be looking at science as a process for learning more about the natural world. And the other thing that science does, it helps us understand what is, not what should be. That's an important difference that I want to make sure that you're comfortable with. And also, we should use science to help us make more informed choices. So I think those are some things that, as we go through this first chapter, I want you to keep in mind. Now, we started off talking about key concepts, and the first thing is the characteristics of life. So this is something you should be comfortable with, something that I might ask on an exam with as far as listing them, giving examples, things like that. So that's something to keep in mind here. So one characteristic of living things is that they have a very different molecular composition than those things that aren't alive. That's going to be really important. If you're alive, you're going to require energy and raw materials, and those raw materials are going to be used to generate energy. All living things are composed of cells. Living things maintain what's known as homeostasis, and what that is a constant internal environment. Things that are living have the ability to respond to their external environment. They have the capacity to grow and reproduce. And another really important thing here, and this has gotten controversial when we talk about evolution, this is something that some people believe in, but as a scientist, we do know that living things evolve. This is going to be an overview as far as signs of life. This is an animation that you can look at on your own. I'm not going to spend any time with it here as part of our screencast. This is something that it's available in an animation slide, or if you download this presentation and play it in screen mode. Now, the other thing that we're going to look at here is how do we group things that are living and what these characteristics are. And I'm going to focus mostly on humans here. So I'm going to kind of point out the things that I want you to understand. So the ones that we belong to, that's definitely going to be something that's important. So there's three domains. There's a domain of bacteria, archaea, and then eukarya. That is ours, okay? Now, the next thing I want you to be comfortable with, what are the kingdoms in eukarya? So they are Protista, Animalia, Fungi, and Plantae. And you probably figured out that we belong to the kingdom Animalia. Here you can kind of see things breaking down as far as the earliest organisms and how they break out into these three different kingdoms. And then through growth, development, and evolution, we see development happening within these. Now, if we're looking at criteria that are used for classification, one of the most important things is whether or not a cell has a nucleus. So if I look at bacteria and archaea, they do not have a membrane-bound nucleus. That's going to be a very, very critical distinction. The domain eukarya has a membrane-bound nucleus, so that's going to be important. Another thing that's going to be important when we look at the criteria that's used for these classifications are the number of cells in a particular organism. Are they unicellular, or are they much more complex multicellular organisms? Also, another characteristic that's used to separate and use these for classification, the type of metabolism that the organism is using. Is it aerobic? Is it anaerobic? Okay, so those are some things to keep in mind when we're looking at how things are actually classified. Now, kind of giving you some examples of these. So if we look at the domain eukarya, these are these 4 kingdoms we kind of talked about before. We have protists. They are unicellular. They're simple multicellular, eukaryotic. And really good examples of those are going to be algae and slime molds. Plantae, they kind of speak for themselves. Okay, they're going to produce their energy via photosynthesis. If we look at Animalia, so multicellular, eukaryotic, and heterotrophic. When we look at fungi, they're also eukaryotic, but they're decomposers. And examples of fungi are going to be molds, mushrooms, and yeast. Now, here is basically how we break down humans. So the domain is eukarya, the kingdom, Animalia. If we look at the phylum Chordata, indicating that there is a vertebral column, class Mammalia, so warm-blooded, primates, Hominidae, genus Homo, and species Sapiens. So this is how we completely classify humans according to this schema in biology. Now, if we look at some other characteristics, okay, so the smallest unit of classification system is a species. So one or more populations of organisms, they have similar physical and functional characteristics, but probably the most important thing that's going to characterize them is the ability of species to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. The second smallest unit is genus, and all humans belong to the same genus and species, Homo sapiens. Now, if we look at some defining features that actually describe humans, the first is that ability to stand upright and walk on 2 legs. That's known as being bipedal. So bipedalism is an example of that. If we look at the opposable thumb, this opposable thumb allows us to be tool users, which really separates us from all other animals out there. So that ability to grasp objects between our thumb and our fingertips, very, very important, allows us to have precise hand movements, something that's not common in other animals. Here, when we look at a large brain, it's not just having a large brain, it's a large brain relative to body size. If we look at whales and elephants, of course they're going to have large brains because they're really big animals. But if we look at the size of our brain and actually compare it to our body size, it's relatively large. The last defining feature of humans is the capacity for language. And this includes both spoken and written. And in the Rochester area, I think it's important that we include American Sign Language. Rochester has a very large deaf population, so I think it's important to make sure that we are including that as a defining feature of human and an example of language. Now, the other thing that we want to look at is size and how things are organized. And I'm going to move to this next slide because I like the visuals that you're seeing here. And so one of the things that you'll be required to do probably on the first exam is to list these things based on size. And as we get more through this book, we'll spend a lot more time talking about organ systems, organs, tissues, and the difference between them and how they're organized and their overall functions. Now, the smallest is going to be the atom. Atoms form molecules, and then we have cells. So now we're moving on to living things. So we have the cell, tissue, to organs, to organ system, to organisms, and then we have populations, community, ecosystems, ending with the biosphere. Okay, so you should be very comfortable in working those out from smallest to largest.